don't actually claim that all research is comparative, basically, because if you're writing about voting in America or youth in Russia without knowing that voting exists in other countries, and youth actually lives, from New Zealand, to Norway, and you don't have this, in mind, you actually don't know what you're studying to begin with. Then you always make certain comparative assessment, saying that you always think that, school children in Russia are this and that, and meaning that there are other school children somewhere else which are different. I mean, whether you do it methodologically based on methodological nationalism or just on locality, you always, when we study one small area in rural Russia, we always compare it with other rural areas we've been to, It's inescapable. And I think the advantage of international project is that it forces you to explicate your comparative framework. So instead of it being hidden and low quality, non-reflexive, you have to be reflexive in what you compare with what and how you do that in general. And the second is that I really do think that, it comes out of, I think now it comes out of, of attempt to build a unified Europe, that localities or regions under national level are getting more attention. But it's still a comparative work, and it makes sense that if people do a study of a small town, they do it on a nowadays level. It's a comparative study. You take 5 towns, 6 towns, and then there should be some framework on which you base a selection of towns, or and if you do school children like I do, you just take schools, and it's already comparative work, right? Even if it's one city. And then I actually, in my work and quantitative work, I do not believe in national representative samples unless it's really cross-country work like Ron does, because then it's really sort of representative. 1,000 people can be represented for a country, because when you have a power of comparing 90 countries, right? The error of measuring something with 1,000 people really is not important, because you have a scatter plot of 90 points getting, and when you try to do more, then you realize it's again like even in World Value Survey, Italy has subnational samples, because Italy knows that north of Italy and south of Italy are very, very different. And that's one of the points we're trying to make in this, with Ron's project, as we will be working on Russian regions, because we do believe that it's not much of a sense of talking about Russia just on the basis of 1,000 people, which is mixing South Russia, North Russia, Siberia, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, all together with Yamalo-Nenetsky Автономный округ, and you name it, that sort of thing. So if we think that international projects will bring us closer to Earth, so to speak, and down to the localities and the specificity of the local people, more power to international projects. I rather doubt it though, because I think that in many cases of European framework something, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, they're not yet,
Sorry, they've renamed they've renamed them now, so there will be no framework.
No,
there'll be no more.
They've renamed it.
So I think it's sort of, it's getting sort of lighter, you know? I mean, looking, just after being, you know, to some conferences, listening to the results of European projects, instead of getting really grounded in sort of locality, doing good case study, right? And then comparing, you know, the international project forces people to take case study less seriously, because it have to be sort of quick and dirty to compare. I don't think, I mean, I don't think that people would be accepting the case studies I've seen done in Hungary, say, in comparing with France, you know, no, migrant children or Roma children, you know, if they would be thinking of it as a case study. But when it's case study, take 10 case studies, it's sort of, you know, it can be less work, because I think it, I'm not sure that actually international projects are forcing us to do more work in the field, maybe even less, because we think that if it doesn't matter how much we work, because, you know, if we have, you know, 10 comparative cases, you know, it will somehow work out in comparison.
Let me give a further push for comparison. Though, let's say, a study of one family can be fascinating. Buddenbrooks, the study of one family, it's not even all of Germany, it's not even all of Lübeck, it's one family in Lübeck. Fascinating study of change between generations. So I clearly don't think the only way is comparative, but I'd say there's a big advantage. The greatest study of the United States political culture, Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, written 170 years ago, still read and viewed with, this guy was really smart and is still cited today, is a one-country study, but the reason it's so brilliant is, it was written by a Frenchman. And he had always in the back of his mind, wow, this is really different from France.
Sure.
And so he would add a freshness, a perspective. Though he talks about America, he's always seeing it from the perspective of a Frenchman, and hey, this is really different from the way it works back home. And so he was struck by a number of things, and he had an insight that an American writing about America probably would have missed, because he had this comparative perspective. So it's a big plus, I would say. It's not the only way to do things. If you want to do, I've sometimes thought of doing a study of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where Mom and Dad grew up, and it's an obscure little town in Wisconsin, but in its own way quite fascinating. It's worth doing. You might find some very interesting things, but I think you're more likely to come up with things that interest lots of people by comparative analysis, because it gives you a bigger perspective.
Hillary, what do you think about the quality of field work done in large comparative projects versus smaller? It's like, you know, I had colleagues who wanted to do, you know, study of rural Russia compared with study of rural Hungary. And one of the points in their letter was like, please promise us it's not going to be something like Framework 7, you know. You know, that sort of, you know.
What were they thinking about? What's, I'm not familiar with this. What's so bad about Framework 7?
Basically, my idea is that, you know, when 7 universities in Europe get together to do some work on something, they take each other, you know, their own task within the framework comparative work lighter. Mm-hmm. In the sense that if they would be doing their own project on Roma children in Hungary, they would do more work, take more villages, visit more schools, and spend more time than when they have this agreement which goes from, you know, England to Hungary, many people, and then I think that it's that, and there are too much time and energy spent on coordination. Mm-hmm. So it's actually less coordination that we would like it to be. So basically the idea is that if we have 2 or 3 partners, that's the maximum which gives you the advantage of being comparative with doing field work, right? When it's 7, it's sort of, the coordination is so unbearable, you know, that you either, because when you do that sort of cross-national work, you actually do not have, you know, much of coordination task in terms, because you have an instrument which is forced on all the nations in the world, right? You know, and you know, you collect data and then work. If it's field work, then, you know, coordinating between 3 partners, it's a lot of work. And the idea is that basically when you have 7 partners, it's way beyond the working situation. So in this case, you actually take the coordination lighter, and the workload is getting lighter. And I don't know, I mean, I never experienced that, you know, I never had any, you know, 7 partners project of that sort. So my question is to Hillary, whether we think, you know, this is happening in Europe in general, these, you know, multi-site, multi-something.
I mean, I can talk from my experience. I must confess that nobody has ever accused any project I've run of being light in work, or to. We have many of the other comments and complaints all of the time. I think it depends on the project, and I think there are very, very different projects within FP7. I mean, this is a lot. The one we're involved in at the moment is a large integrated project, which means it's very large. It's 16 partners, 14 countries. And I think the key to fieldwork is, yes, I mean, I think one of the reasons it was funded was that it was probably much more ambitious than many other projects. I think there's a tendency, especially where the data is primarily survey-based, to go back to batteries of questions which have been tried and tested elsewhere, because they have a history of being translated, and we know already many of the issues that come up. So it does lighten the work. But then, to a certain extent, within survey methodology, that is, you know, that is how it's done, and there's a reason for that, because then you get more longitudinal data, and so on. And with our project, we've got huge amounts of fieldwork, because we've got ethnographic case studies in each country, alongside semi-structured interviews, as well as the survey data. So it's a very, very empirically heavy project. And I think, I mean, the other one that I'm coordinating at the moment is the kind of thing you're talking about, which is lovely, yes, in terms of which do I enjoy more as a coordinator, the project on post-socialist punk, where we've got 3 ethnographic teams working in just 3 countries, and you can close down the difference because it's only post-socialist punk. So yes, of course, I'm taking to my mind what punk has been in the States, what punk has been in the UK. Of course, it informs it, but actually we only need to work through the key concepts in terms of how they work in 3 countries, which, you know, have something in common, not everything in common, of course, but something in common. That's a much easier job than defining what a political institution might mean, or what democracy might mean in the middle of a questionnaire across 14 different countries in Europe. But I mean, we just come from a meeting in Frankfurt where we sat down, and certainly, you know, there was no instrument imposed on anybody. We sat and went through for 24 hours almost solidly every single question, and talked about how that would work in each different country. So it doesn't feel to me that the instruments are light, but that's a project that I'm managing, and I certainly would never manage a project that was light on fieldwork. But I think there are other projects there, and I'm not particularly. I don't think it particularly matters how many countries. I don't think it's a difference between the projects that are 5 to 7 partners and the projects that are 14 to 16. I think it depends on what what the research objectives are from the project.
Okay.
Let me raise a topic that has come up in the course of doing cross-national research. There are 2 different approaches. One would be to have a coalition of people doing fieldwork in France and Russia and China and Hungary, and one approach would be to have the Hungarians analyze the Hungarian data, and the Russians analyze the Russian data, the Americans analyze the American data, and this is often proposed and sometimes done. I would say it's much more efficient, much more productive, by and large, to have all the data given to everyone, and have each person analyze topics, do analysis of questions that interest that person across all the nations, because that way you get a nice integrated perspective of the data from all these different countries. And it's not, this is sort of the report on the French data, and over here we have something that's vaguely familiar sounding, the report on the Hungarian data. I think this is a much more productive way to do it, and thus, though I came to Russia and even wound up spending a long time in Russia, because we need a Russian partner. We wanted a strong Russian partner for the World Values Survey, because we need the insights of Russians in interpreting what's going on in Russia. It's very valuable. There are actually two reasons. One is kind of a political story about, are we raiding these countries and carrying off the data and violating it? I think it is much better a research strategy to work with somebody in every country you study for reasons of equity and many things, but also it's just because we need the insights of insiders to interpret what we find. Unless we are real geniuses like Alexis de Tocqueville, who picked up what was going on in America very quickly, but it doesn't always happen. It's really useful to have the insights of insiders. So it's important to have this, but I would say, don't have the insiders analyze all the data from Russia and ignore the data from Hungary and China and the US. You find much more, you get much more out of it if you're able to look at the data from all the countries and divide it up by topics, with the Russians analyzing what makes people happy or miserable, for example, and the Americans what is conducive to democracy, and someone else focusing on gender equality in all these countries. I think it's a much more productive way of slicing the work.
And also to add, was said concerning this efficiency of working with projects where there are so many partners. We have with our center different kinds of such experiences, and of course I agree with Hillary that it depends on the management, who is doing the management, because we had not such a good experience before, but working, for example, in this project. We are working for now, I think, 6-7 months, and it is a quite hard work, I would say. It is so big expectations from our partners, and because it is a lot of work, and it is also challenge on the field work, on the amount of work, because, for example, now we are discussing the questionnaire of the survey which are going to do in more than 1 year. So that is a quite a new experience also for us. Or preparing case studies which are we going to do maybe in 2 years, and thinking about it. So I think that is a much more inside work, and I would not say that it's a really lighter work. From one side, what I see real advantage of doing projects where so many countries involved, like say here, 14 countries, that there is opportunity to see the diversity of different kind of national contexts, and the centralization of the idea that there is European sociology, or East European, or Russian, or Central Asian, because we have partners from Europe, 4 or maybe 7, 6, from East Europe also 4, maybe also from post-Soviet space like 3 or 4, and in our discussion of the